I would like to call to order the September 9, 2024 school board meeting at 6 o'clock. Ms. Marsan will take the roll.
Mrs. Bell? Here. Mrs. Fairgrieve?
Here.
Mr. Kuschert is absent tonight. He could not be here due to a business obligation. Mr. Lentz?
Here.
Mrs. McCabe?
Here.
Mr. McNally?
Here.
Mr. Lackner?
Here, please stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That brings us to item 2 on the agenda, the public hearing for the District 303 24-25 budget. I'd like to call the public hearing to order at 6:01 p.m. regarding the adoption of the 24-25 Community Unit School District 303 budget. The budget was discussed at the July 29, 2024 Business Services meeting and approved for public display and public hearing at the August 5th school board meeting. There's a document in the agenda that lists our current cash balances as of June 30, 2024, as well as August 31st, 2024. Are there any comments from community members associated with the budget? Hearing none, are there any comments from board members?
I just wanted to thank the board for their process this time on the budget and the 5-year review that we've done. So again, I want to thank the board for the diligence. I also want to thank admin for taking a deeper look and also making a number of changes that we were looking at. So thank you.
Seeing no other comments, the hearing for the adoption of the 24-25 Community Unit School District 303 budget is now closed at 6:02 p.m. That brings us to item 2B, a public hearing for the Mid-Valley 24-25 budget. I'd like to call the public hearing to order at 6:03 p.m. regarding the adoption of the 24-25 Mid-Valley Special Education Cooperative budget. The budget was discussed at the July 29th, 24 Business Services meeting and approved for public display and public hearing at the August 5th, 2024 school board meeting. There's a document in the agenda that lists the current cash balances as of June 30th, 2024. Are there any comments from community members? Are there any comments from board members? The hearing for the adoption of the 24-25 Mid-Valley Special Education Cooperative budget is now closed at 6:04 p.m. That brings us to item 3 on the agenda, reports to the board. 3A is the superintendent report. Dr. Gordon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Lackner. Tonight, I'd like to welcome up Rita and Rayanne Pay-Leitner regarding 50 years of women's sports in D303. Have the privilege of inviting them up to speak about a legacy night within our district. So I'll hand it to the two of you. I'm not sure who's going to kick us off. All right.
Thank you. I'm Rita Pay-Leitner, St. Charles varsity class 73-74, and this is my daughter Rayanne, varsity class 07-11. Thank you, Dr. Gordon, for allowing us a few minutes to share about Legacy Night. And see from the slide, it's celebrating 50 years of girls sanctioned sports in St. Charles. Our quest began last winter when I realized that the beautiful Touch Pro screen outside the gym at East, if any of you have seen it, this is kind of right. And it's awesome. It's an awesome resource. It includes yearbook scan team photos for every year and every team, starting with 1967-68 school year, except the year I was a varsity athlete, my sophomore year, 73-74. It was an inadvertent omission, as here we go. The 73-74 yearbook editorial staff decided to get kind of artsy and thought it would be very nouveau to not have any team pictures or club pictures whatsoever. They're all, just random shots of activity. So anyway, I brought up the exclusion to my daughter, adding that it was a real shame because that was the first year the IHSA sanctioned girls sports, 73-74. And doing the math, that was 50 years ago. In that moment, we realized this called, more Rayanne than me, but this called for a celebration, acknowledging those first varsity classes and the 50 years of subsequent St. Charles girl athletes. Rayanne will briefly describe the celebration plans, but I wanted to first put in a plea for help, and I gave you all little postcards, locating that first class of sanctioned athletes. Between the lack of usable yearbook pictures, the move from here to Dunham Road in 77, the high school split in 2000, and the mold crisis in 2001, there are just no records or rosters of those first teams to be found. The first teams were volleyball, track, basketball, tennis, badminton, and bowling.
So obviously there's been, I forgive my voice, obviously there's been female athletes since the beginning of time. And obviously there were intramural and GAA teams in St. Charles, but the monumental moment that we're talking about honoring here is when a group came in and said, hey, girls in PE class, do any of you actually want to play sports? The state's telling us we have to do this. Do any of you actually want to do it? And about 45 of them put their hands in the air. My mom likes to say they weren't the best athletes in the world. But from my perspective, what mattered is that they put their hand up in the air. They volunteered and they chose to be the first ones. Well, not that first year, they had to wear their PE uniforms the first year. But after that, they were the first ones wearing and choosing to represent their high school on the fields and courts. And so that's what we're going to get to celebrate, because that's something that they started, that I got to be a part of in 2007 to 11, as you can see by this 2009 shirt that I busted out from somewhere. And the countless other girls that chose to put the uniform on, representing St. Charles on the fields and courts across the 50 years. So that's the legacy that we're looking to honor with Legacy Night in January of 2025. Not only honoring those girls in the pioneer classes of 74 to 76, although that will be a big part of it, but also the decades of athletes that followed in their footsteps. So we're building a weekend centering around a ceremony at the East-North girls basketball game. That'll be on January 31st of 2025. But we're planning on having several events throughout that weekend, really looking to, again, celebrate those 50 years. And it really comes down to 4 different components. First, celebrate. Right? We're obviously going to talk about the accomplishments and the state champions and all of that. But really, it's about, again, everyone who chose to put on the uniform and the kinship that 50 years of girls share. The second component is reunion. So we want to fill that gym with 50 years worth of athletes. That's kind of the hope. But we're also going to be providing opportunities for individual teams to have reunions. So I myself, for example, I'm going to be looking to set up, class of 2010-11 softball reunion in town, class of 2010-11 basketball in town. So we're going to have these opportunities and encourage these mini reunions. The third element is education, which is opportunities to educate the current athletes that are out there and even the ones coming up into high school. Because if I didn't realize that this had been 50 years of girls' sports and I've been laughing at that yearbook my whole life, hearing these stories, then there's no way that the girls who are currently in the hallways would know. I wouldn't expect them to. So we're going to take this opportunity. We're very grateful to Mr. Richter and the team at St. Charles East. They're opening up the opportunity to do some panels, to have some different educational opportunities throughout that week. And so that's going to be a really big part of what we're doing. And we're going to be connecting with those current athletes. And which brings us really to the fourth point, which is connection. We want to connect to our past and to each other and today's athletes, because that's how we get the legacy to continue. So first, we want to just thank Dr. Gordon and everybody's support here. We appreciate any support you can give us. But really, we want you to save the date. We want you to come along. And if you know any athletes, certainly that first class, like my mom described, but any athletes in the last 50 years, the last thing we want is on February 1st for someone to go, wait, what happened? Right? So we just want to make sure the word gets out. We have a a webpage that's attached to the St. Charles East Boosters webpage. But we got Facebook groups, we're all over the place, and I know that we'll have some things to share with you here, and it's also on the QR code on the in front of you. But we would love for you to spread the word, and if there's anyone who's hearing my words right now that feels inclined to help, we have a committee that's working very hard to do all these different components and make these things happen. And you're more than welcome to join us there as well. Our next meeting is next Wednesday at the St. Charles Library. So thank you so much for your time, and we're available if you have any questions or concerns.
Thank you. And I did.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
we are. Yes, sorry. I get a little black and orange heavy, but it's about St. Charles as a whole.
Yeah.
Love it.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. For next, we have our monthly highlight video, which will be played here in a moment.
Morning, have a great day today.
There's amazing things happening around our district, and two of those pieces I'd like to highlight and thank the board for is you saw in here the opening of our transition program at Lincoln School. What a wonderful welcome back. We had an event where families, students, the staff all came together to celebrate their new space. It was incredibly heartwarming and uplifting. Also with our new EC Center being opened again over at the Haynes Center, both wonderful events. So, but appreciate the communications team putting together that highlight video. We transition into the proposed residential development. As you know, during our business services meeting on August 26th, we shared what we know about the proposed Charles Farm residential development that the city is considering. At that meeting, we assessed the potential for increased enrollment, how they could impact schools in our budget. Due to the uncertainty of this proposed development, the District 303 administration recommended to the board to pause construction and funding in addition at the Richmond school to house the dual language program. We have met with our dual language teachers and staff at Richmond, explained the situation, and we are considering our options. I recognize how frustrating and confusing this is to our staff and community. It is also very frustrating to our board and administration. We worked incredibly hard last year on district-wide boundaries and decisions revolving around Richmond and other schools, which included the dual language program. Now, some of that work must be undone. The city requested that the district submit a letter regarding the development by September 6th. administration sent our letter on September 4th. Here are the contents of that letter. To whom it may concern, I am Dr. Paul Gordon, Superintendent of Community Unit School District 303, which serves the city of St. Charles and neighboring communities. I'm writing to address our district's concerns regarding the proposed Charles Farm development on the city's west side, which falls within our District 303 boundaries. Over the past 2 years, District 303 has undertaken a major initiative to revise our school boundaries, a process that involved relocating over 1,045 students to new schools. Following extensive demographic analysis and coordinating with the city, the Board of Education approved new boundaries on February 13, 2024. We commenced the current school year with these revised boundaries for our elementary and middle school students. However, the proposed development threatens to undermine these recent adjustments, potentially introducing hundreds of new students and exacerbating the overcrowding issues in our already strained middle and elementary schools. Specifically, the elementary school adjacent to this proposed development is already near capacity, and the influx of new students would further challenge our transportation and operational efficiencies. While we acknowledge the necessities for residential growth within the district and the city's committing to maintaining St. Charles as a vibrant community, we are concerned that the current land cash formula, as prescribed by municipal code, inadequately addresses the financial implications of this development. The formula's one-time payment fails to sufficiently support the infrastructure needed to accommodate the current projected increased student population. To illustrate, District 303 had earmarked approximately $11 million to construct 6 new classrooms at Richmond Elementary to expand and support our dual language program. In response to the projected addition of 260 students from the Charles Farm development, we have had to pause this critical construction due to funding constraints. The estimated cost of constructing 6 new classrooms at one elementary and one middle school is between $25 to $30 million. Based on current estimates of 1.3 to 1.5 million per classroom for additions and at 850 to 950 per square foot for new construction. Given these considerations, we strongly urge the city of St. Charles to support District 303's objection to the existing land cash formula and to require Pulte Homes to fund the necessary classroom expansions. Should the city be able to support this adjustment, we respectfully request that Pulte Homes significantly reduce the number of residential units planned within D303 boundaries. We would advocate for a substantial allocation of the Del Webb community within our district. D303 is committed to providing quality education and fostering a strong sense of community. However, the proposed development presents challenges that could outweigh its benefit for our district in the broader St. Charles area. We respectfully ask that the city of St. Charles adopt either of our proposed solutions to address these financial concerns. Sincerely, Paul Gordon, District Superintendent. As this board, and I want to make sure the community knows, this board is not a voting body for this development. This board has no voting rights over Charles Farm development. I want to make that very clear. On September 30th, our board with our administration will dive deeper into this development and its financial impact on our district. We have invited, and they have responded to joining us. The city officials will also be joining us, this city administrators, to that meeting. That's where we'll dive into more in-depth analysis from the district as to where we're at, where we're going. But a lot of this is still a wait and see. There's a lot of unknowns, and it's why administration and the board concurred with our pause. There are too many unknowns with this project for us to move forward. The district does not have, we have that $11 million, and that needed to be held back to make sure that we knew exactly where the growth was going to occur. Board, any questions on that part of it? just on my statement.
We are going to be having a discussion later on this development, so.
Yeah, with with a slight, just a touch on to the new construction. What does new construction look like for that, and how do you obtain those new dollars for the ongoing growth of the district? So yes, we will be having that.
Great, thank you.
So I have a couple questions. Is this the right time? I'm a little,
Let's see. Let's see.
Okay.
Let's go with a let's see.
who is just the city coming? We're not asking the developer to come.
Correct.
Okay. And you'll figure out where we will be located. I assume we'll have.
I assume we would
we'll
have a few people.
bigger audience.
I think
that
we would
will
have a
attend.
bigger audience. So yes.
The other question is about the dual language program. And we have, as we are planning L&T, we're planning to bring the work that needs to be done in order to strengthen that program and with not having the opportunity to do what we had planned. So can you give us a little bit on that?
I can give you a little bit on that. We met with the Richmond staff and the teachers of the dual language program who are currently housed at Davis over for very similar conversation about the pausing. What we committed to was that we will work in a collaborative fashion with the staff to figure out what those next steps are. I'm not sure today what those next steps are, other than we needed to pause. There won't be construction at Richmond. And for dual language, either one way or two way, you need 12 classrooms. So that's a piece that will be paused as well. But Dr. Igo and others who will champion this will be bringing that back. I would anticipate we'll have an update at the October L&T meeting. And then as we get further into the year, we'll have more in-depth conversations on it. So that next update will be in October on that specific aspects of it.
And I think that this board is, we need to say out loud that we are concerned about the students who are in that program, that they will receive the kind of education and instructional supports that they need to have to be successful and to move to excellence. And so I'm hoping, and I know as we've planned out L&T, that this will be something that we'll do ongoing, but it won't, it needs to be a priority.
It is a priority. It is a priority. Okay, next update, cell phone advisory group. I'm pleased to share that we had 130 applicants were received to participate in the cell phone advisory committee. As expected, most of these were parents, but I was also impressed with how many of our students were interested in joining. Due to the level of interest, we more than doubled the number of group members originally planned. We were originally going to go with a modest 30. We've now moved that to 71 people. We're going to work hard to facilitate this exceptionally well. We also wanted this group to represent a broad range of viewpoints, so our selection including many parents, staff members, and students. Additionally, the views selected within that group members closely mirrored those of all the applicants. So of the 70 members, 28 supported using cell phones during the class, 46 did not support using cell phones in the class, and 25% were undecided. So we really wanted to take that who applied and use that same percentage as we were making the selections through that as well. So we're excited to kick that off. And again, board members, you're welcome to join us for those sessions.
Well, do you have a breakdown of how many were parents?
I can get that to you.
I
Yeah.
think that'd be helpful.
The majority were parents. The majority
I
were
assume
parents.
so, but.
Yeah. And again, that first meeting will be on September 25th. But I really appreciate all those who put their name in the hat. I am sorry that we could not select everyone, but we will be putting out a survey for our whole community to be able to participate. Finally, transportation. Transportation has been working nonstop to adjust the routes. The elementary boundaries did impact that. Oftentimes, within the transportation, it looks good on paper and they need to run those routes. So the drivers have learned the routes and they've already started making adjustments. Spoke to members of the administration team on the transportation side. They've again continuing the hiring process. They've been able to split some of the routes that were really troublesome as they were either too long of a route or too many people on the route. So they continue to work that through each and every day. My team continues to communicate with their team about those individual routes that are concerning, and they continue to look at those. So again, we're making headway into cleaning up our transportation. This is not too dissimilar from many years from every other year as well. So we continue to get better each day in that area. With that, Mr. Lackner, I hand it back over to you. Sorry for the lengthiness of that update.
Thank you for the update, Dr. Gordon. That brings us to board committee reports. And if it's okay with Mrs. McCabe, we'll start with L&T.
Since I arrived very late to the L&T meeting, I can tell you that the discussion had to do with the calendar of what L&T was going to present and the beginning conversation of the student achievement report, which will be presented in full or detail September 16th.
Thank you, Mrs. McCabe. That brings us to business services.
All right. So we had a good construction update. Again, thank you to the team for all the hard work. I think we were able to cut the ribbons. It was pretty great. One of the other items on our list, we had a discussion of the St. Charles TIF extension for the First Street. The board asked admin to go back and get in writing or to get in writing of if we could expire that TIF sooner. Admin has been able to go through that action. So that's on the docket for tonight. I'm sure we'll have a discussion there. There were some working bond cash transfers. We also talked about the development. Dr. Gordon already gave that. We also talked about our vacant land update. So we do have the land that is sitting at Silver Glen. The board discussed that. We constantly get inquiries. We did give admin direction on that we are not selling that parcel. So that was also there. You'll see in there's district-wide air conditioning purchases for phase 2. Our automation control updates, some tennis court lighting, and some renewals that are all in our consent agenda for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz. That brings us to item 4, citizen comments. And Mr. Lentz, I think you have the preamble there.
I do. During public comment period, members of the public body who wish to speak are asked to first state their name and the community in which they reside. Each individual will have up to 3 minutes to address the board on a topic of their choosing. We ask all individuals who address the board to do so with respect and civility towards others. Please note that personnel matters are sensitive and confidential. We also want to inform our speakers that all regular, special, and committee meetings are live streamed and available for viewing at any time on the district's YouTube channel. Personal information should be considered before making a statement that will be recorded and made public. While the board will not respond to today's public comment during this meeting, we are committed to listening to you to help support our work for the district and on behalf of our students, staff, families, and community members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz. Our first speaker is Peggy Mazurko.
Good evening. My name is Peggy Mazurko. I live in Campton Hills and have 3 children in the district. I'm here tonight to address the ongoing transportation issues my 4-year-old daughter Savannah has faced over the last year because of lack of competence from James Reeves, the Director of Transportation. Savannah is deaf, and while she uses cochlear implants to hear, she's extremely shy and nonverbal with most people. We also use sign language in our house as her dad and grandparents are also deaf. When she turned 3, James refused to provide an aid, citing a no-touch policy. That meant if Savannah's cochlear implants fell off, which happened anywhere from 40 to 50 times a day, she would have no access to sound for the entire ride. After a few months, with the help of an advocate, an aid was finally agreed upon. There have been other incidents as well. Last summer, Savannah, who had just turned 3, was placed in a van with 2 high school students over the summer without an aide, and we weren't informed. Would anyone in this room put their preschooler on a car with 2 teenage strangers for over 2 hours each day? We were uncomfortable with the situation, so we pulled her off the route until a safer solution was found. As far as I'm aware, District 303 does not put preschool students and high schoolers together on any district transportation or in classrooms because it is developmentally inappropriate and causes safety issues, but James does not consider this an issue. After months of unanswered emails last fall, even though we were promised weekly updates in our IEP meeting, James finally assigned an aide in January who was proficient in sign language, exactly what Savannah needed. Savannah built a bond with this aide, and for the first time, we were secure about her transportation. For the last 7 months, things have been going great. Just 3 days before school started, my husband and I were informed that my daughter's aide would be replaced due to employee seniority. Her aide, who was proficient in sign language, is still with the district and would be replaced with a stranger who cannot communicate with her. It took Savannah 6 months to become comfortable enough for her to start talking to her current aide. She spends anywhere from 10 to 12 hours each week on district transportation. So having someone she's comfortable communicating with is crucial for both her communication needs and safety. James, the director of transportation, is fully aware of Savannah's challenges, yet it's clear he doesn't take the children's needs into consideration. This change is not just disruptive for a little one, but it's detrimental to the progress that she's made. After I pushed back those first few days, the night before school, I was informed that Savannah's previously assigned aide was reassigned to her route. During the first week of school, Savannah spent nearly 2 hours in the van on the way home because they combined her route with another child's, I assume to save on cost. Savannah, a 4-year-old, spent over an hour repeatedly signing potty to another aide while waiting 45 minutes at another school for the student and not allowing her to use the bathroom. This isn't the first time she's spent hours on transportation to or from school either, and all of these are just a few events that have transpired over the last year. I have to wonder, does James truly care about Savannah's needs? Are other children in the district also suffering? The pattern of his poor decisions and lack of regard for her well-being shows me that the director of transportation is either incompetent or indifferent to the challenges Savannah faces. Despite numerous IEP meetings and ongoing discussion, the team continues to push back on what should be basic accommodations for her. Tomorrow morning, I'll be at another IEP meeting tomorrow to address these transportation issues. Savannah deserves better, and every special education child who relies on transportation does too. I hope that in bringing this to your attention as Savannah's parents and advocates, you are aware of these concerns and are able to take any necessary steps to ensure that all employees, including James, are able to fulfill their roles with the appropriate accommodations, care, and concern for all of these children on transportation. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Next speaker is Mike Pezza.
Good evening. My name is Mike Pezza, Anthem Heights. Talked to you guys numerous times last year. Didn't really feel like talking to you guys ever again, but no one returns emails. None of you. I was irate this weekend. I watched you guys, your last board meeting, and I do feel like you guys were blindsided by this out in Charles Fox or whatever it's called. I do feel that, but I think it's absolutely BS that you guys think you should go get another demographer or your administrators because you dropped the ball on this one. The city council meeting said 25 years ago that was a planned residential thing. Why wasn't that in the concept of this? This changes everything. How's Richmond? You promised me 2 years, 2 years, the most prestigious school in the district. It's going to fail. Miss Maccabee, you were afraid of that because of the last failure. It's going to fail. You know why? Because the money's going to go out there. If it gets approved, it's going to go out there. I wish your camera guy had pictures of all the kids coming home from schools that are crying, saying, we're not part of Wasco. We're not part of Fearson. Get those pictures. You should be an advocate for bullying in this district. And nothing said. You are the quietest one, and you should be an advocate for bullying. My son comes home crying. My daughter crying. My neighbors crying. They're all in different schools. All of them. You guys should be ashamed of yourselves and embarrassed. You're all a joke. whether you just found out about this or not, the detriment that you put on this community and the kids is sad. And the promises of Richmond being great, by God's grace, my kids didn't go there and they got transferred to Wasco, by God's grace. But all the families there who thought they were getting a new school and now they're not. Come on, guys. Like, you guys, it's a joke. Everyone should resign. It's a joke. Really is. It's sad. I'll be at the next meeting. I'm gonna keep coming back.
Thank you for your comments. The next speaker is,
It's gonna be the
Most important are the kids, guys.
You guys don't take in consideration of the kids at all. It's all about numbers, it's all about money. Maybe you guys should start thinking and going and talking to those kids, because they cry all the time.
And Mrs. Bell, remember what I said.
the next speaker is Terry McCann Mikulski.
Thank you. I am a resident of St. Charles, and unfortunately, I don't know the neighborhood I live in, but I have two students, one who goes to North High School and one who goes to Compass. I am here to actually talk about bullying. It is a problem in our district, as I think we are all aware. I will be much gentler in my speech. It is something that is noted at all levels in our district, elementary, middle school, high school. But it's something I've noticed that we don't really talk about at the district level. There are programs that seem to happen. I don't want to call it haphazardly, but they do happen and are presented to the students. There were kind of some things that were presented here and there to the parents. But unfortunately, there's really nothing that addresses it district-wide. There was nothing in the superintendent goals. Policies, they're updated because the state requires them to be updated. But there's really nothing that we're doing program-wise or, again, district-wide that addresses bullying, harassment of students from other students, peer conflict, district-wide. And I hate to say this, with the increase of things like school shootings, we're noticing a trend that these students who are doing this, they're doing it because they've experienced a lot of bullying. So I think it's becoming more and more important that we start addressing these types of things before we become a school district where this happens. And I don't think we want that as one of our statistics. So I would really like us to start talking about this as a district before we become a statistic. The other thing I'd like to talk about is that I know we have made some changes with regards to our school shooter drills, the lockdown drills, and some of that information that some of our students are getting is that the defend portion is more of a first reaction rather than a last resort. And I was personally witness to some of the reaction of some of the students who've already received that information. And I know that information has not actually gone out from the district to parents, but it would be helpful if parents are able to talk to their students about some of these changes, to be able to comfort them instead of students coming to parents and saying, we're being told to defend ourselves and make ourselves a target, which I know is a misrepresentation of what the training is and what the teachers are saying. But the students, especially special needs students, may need more instruction on this. So I'm just trying to be clear that parents may need some information too about this change. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker is Mark Titer.
Thank you, President Lecter, Superintendent Gordon, and the rest of the board. I really appreciate this opportunity tonight to speak to you. I've lived out here for 28 years. Those two fine ladies that were up here earlier reminded me of, I'm a '76 grad from Arlington, so I was a little dated today. But it's kind of cool what they're doing. And I guess where I'm coming from is I'm retired. It'll be 2 years in November. Okay, like I said, I'm part of 303. Both my sons graduated from North. They blessed me with 7 grandkids, and life is pretty special right now. And the thing I wanted to share is I was looking at my last tax bill, and not only did the whole tax bill go up 15%, but that was with my senior discount, which I just received because I turned 66. And school taxes are 10%, went up 10%. Okay, so here's kind of my takeaway, and I got a couple takeaways. The first one is I didn't mind paying school taxes. You know, I think they're getting out of control. I think we need to support our communities in all different areas. I looked at my tax bill. My son's a fireman in Georgetown, Kentucky. I don't have a problem with funding the fire and the police and all that. But the challenge is there's 2 things. Number one, for people that aren't retired and have kids in the system, I think you need to give them the opportunity to vote yay or nay if you guys want to raise taxes. I think that's the only fair thing to do. It's all of their money, so I think they should have the opportunity to be involved in the process. Just like Kane County's doing with the potential tax increase that's going on the April 1st ballot. Here's the second thing for us retirees. Okay, I think you need to minimum freeze it, but I think you need to reduce it for us. You know, we're on fixed incomes, and we know the government is going to play around with the new Social Security COLA that's coming up. There's no doubt because it's not 2.5%. Anybody that goes to the store knows it's not 2.5%. So I would just respectfully ask if you guys would take a look at that. I want to leave you with 2 things. And I thought this was pretty interesting. It came out on Facebook. It went viral. And it says, if you earn it, they tax it. If you spend it, they tax it. If you save it, they tax it. If you invest it, they tax it. If you build it, they tax it. If you sell it, they tax it. If you live, they tax it. If you drive, they tax it. If you eat, they tax it. If you drink, they tax it. If you give it away, they tax it. And when you die, they tax it and they waste it. I want to leave you one other thing that I didn't plan on talking about tonight, but again, my kids are out, and I sense a lot of frustration with parents tonight. And I know all you on the board have a lot of decisions you have to make. I challenge you guys when it was cold outside. Wisdom is the best avenue to do that. And I challenge you. Tomorrow, September 10th, read Proverbs 10, then 11, then 12, and go through the whole book of Proverbs. Because, you know, I pray for the school district every day. Pray for your wisdom. Use that wisdom. Take advantage of the wisest man that ever walked the face of the earth, Solomon. Thank you guys so much, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you for your comments. That brings us to item 5 on the agenda. Yeah, if you want to speak now versus at the end of the session, that's fine. Sure, if you'll just introduce yourself at the start of your comments, that'll
I'm Jerome
suffice.
Johnson of Campton Hills. I'm the executive director of Garfield Farm Museum. I'm also the chairman of the Campton Hills Planning Commission. A little bit of history in regards to the Charles Farm situation. We've anticipated for over 20 years that that property would be developed, except that it would be at the Kane County jurisdiction. And at that jurisdiction, it would not involve as many homes. This is not a foregone conclusion that St. Charles will annex it. So if it's not annexed, it'll stay in Kane County hands, and there would be fewer homes than the proposed 2011 that is being presented by Pulte to the city. So first of all, no annexation, fewer homes. Even if there is a senior community built there at Del Webb, as we just saw, there's a lot of seniors that do not feel comfortable having their taxes raised for school purposes. And so that's going to be against the school district to have, let's say, about 2,000 voters out of 2,000 homes. There'd be half of them would be seniors, the other half would be families. And then you split the community there where you have families who need taxes to support their children's education. So you have that as a challenge. You also have the fact that it's an unpredictable market. We learned that in 2008. That's why that didn't develop, as initially was bought as a speculative interest by the Ryan family, who own Town and Country Homes, and they're currently trying to find a way to leverage their investment by having Pulte come in and promise and get annexed to the city of St. Charles for increased housing by needing sewer and water. So there's also no guaranteed long-term that it would stay a seniors community. So you might wind up with more school children as time goes by. So the big challenge is, do you want more taxpayers that are not going to be friendly towards schools because of their limited incomes? These are big factors. And if this is the case, and I'm really surprised to see that you've had to delay a very important program out of Richmond, the bilingual. That's incredible to me, because of this anticipated, perhaps this might happen kind of thing. So with that, that's where I hope that you will encourage yourselves to talk with other people, especially people in the city of St. Charles, their aldermen and all, to bring forward these concerns that are going to impact all of us living in the school district. I'm a class of 70, by the way, of this very building right here. So I'm a lifelong resident, as my sister is as well. So with that, I want to thank you so much for your time. I appreciate all the effort you put in.
Thank you for your comments. That brings us to item 5 for discussion. 5A is the Charles Farm Development. We're gonna have a discussion a little bit about how some of the funding impacts the school's budget.
That's a perfect setup, Mr. Lackner. Mr. Attaway is here to walk through a brief presentation. The overall premise of this is new construction. How does a school district bring in additional operating revenue based off of a new development? Can't really tap dance on this one very well without Mr. Attaway. We good? Okay. It's your show, Mr. Attaway.
All right, thank you. So during the discussion of business services in August, there were several questions related to the potential development and its impact on property taxes. So as we mentioned at that meeting, we'll review actual projections and estimates at the September business services meeting, but we thought it would be beneficial to provide a high-level overview of that topic tonight. So as a reminder, from our annual levy discussion, the district's tax levy is made in whole dollars and is developed based on the budgeted needs of the district, the prior year's extension, CPI, and the equalized assessed valuation within the district's boundaries. We submit a levy to the counties for each fund, excluding the bond and interest fund, which is levied on our behalf. So one concept or term that is brought up quite frequently when we talk about the levy is tax cap, which actually refers to the property tax extension limitation law. PTEL restricts the growth on property tax revenue to the lesser of 5% or CPI, but it does not cap individual property assessments or tax bills. It excludes the bond and interest levy, and it does not apply to new property. Since Charles Farm would be a new development, we are going to focus on that last point in this review here tonight. So for the purposes of property assessments and the property tax levy, new property refers to the assessed value of brand new construction or additions to existing construction that increase value. Property that was exempt during the prior levy year that has been reclassified as taxable property. Or for long-term construction projects, the annual increase in property value based on the completion of that project each year. So for taxing bodies like a school district, evaluating and estimating enough new property each year during the levy is important, since we are only able to capture the full value of new property during its first assessment year. We increase the levy to make sure we account for the new property within the district, and then that new property becomes part of the base EAV in subsequent years. So one question that may be asked right now is, how does a development like Charles Farm impact my taxes? And from a school district perspective, the short answer is that it doesn't. Actually, the addition of new property allows the school district to increase annual revenue without directly increasing the property tax burden on existing taxpayers. As illustrated in the graphic on the previous slide, the size of the taxing base increases from the new construction. The same tax rate is then applied to a larger tax base, which results in access to additional annual revenue. And then on the next few slides, we'll walk through an example of that. So this slide illustrates a basic property tax calculation. Assessed value is 1/3 of fair market value. So a home with a fair market value of $300,000 has an assessed value of $100,000. Typically, you'll see a single or sometimes multiple exemptions that are deducted from the assessed value, such as general homestead or senior citizen exemptions. Once those are deducted, that results in the equalized assessed valuation, which is the term that we typically talk about with the tax levy. The final property tax amount is then calculated by multiplying the EAV by the tax rate percentage. And it is important to note that the tax levy only affects the tax rate in this calculation, no other part of this. The tax rate is then simply the property tax extension from the taxing body divided by the total EAV in the taxing district. So the school district's tax rate would be calculated by dividing the total tax extension for the district by the EAV within District 303 boundaries. And then this slide shows a comparison of the tax extension and tax rate without new construction and with new construction. There were other variables in these calculations that are on the slide that were held constant between the two, but we're only presenting what's relevant to this conversation. In the first scenario on the left, we are assuming $3 billion in EAV with no new construction. That resulted in a maximum tax revenue of roughly $185.6 million and a tax rate of 6.1864%. In the scenario on the right, we assumed the same $3 billion in existing EAV and then added $50 million in new construction. That increased the tax revenue to $188.7 million, but the tax rate remained unchanged. So based on the basic property tax calculation 2 slides ago, if the tax rate remains unchanged, that means that the property taxes paid by existing taxpayers also remains unchanged as a result of the new construction. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this was meant to be a high-level overview of the impact of new construction on property taxes. At the business services meeting on September 30th, we will review actual projections from Charles Farm Development, including the projected timing of the development, associated tax revenue increases, and operating cost increases based on our operating cost per pupil amount and the projected number of students.
Thank you, Mr. Attaway. I'll open the floor for questions from the board.
I just have a couple. I think it's important that we keep always using $300,000 as a basis of a house value. That's not what it is anymore. Is there a way that we can be more realistic with the number that it is?
Absolutely. I will be honest that typically people in my position use 300,000 because it divides easily by 3.
Yes.
So then every number in the calculation after that is very clean. But absolutely, we can start using a much higher number.
The other part is the teacher in me. Is there any way that we could do, and maybe this really falls in under communications, do a video of some kind. I know that you've got stuff on the website of how finances work and taxes. Because it isn't a simple thing that we decide that it's 6%. There's a whole process of how that works. And it would be nice to have a place to encourage people to go to hear about it. They can they can rewind it 3 or 4 times to have a better understanding. Because I think now with the new development possibilities, it's going to make it more misinformed. And I'd really like for us to be the educating body to do that. The other piece, and then
Just on that note, we have an amazing podcast that Mr. Adway participated in all around that topic. It's a really good one. I would encourage people to listen to it because it really breaks it down and to really understand it.
Can we put it on the front of the website? I think you need a visual with it. So
Also in the across the board update probably as well.
Okay.
just a good place where people could go to really learn about it. The last thing that's come to mind, we've had new property always. And so that, I don't know if that should be part of just a recognition that we had a period of time where we had 3 subdivisions come in, but every year there is new property, and I don't know how that fits into discussion.
That's an important point. And that's something that we discuss typically every year in the October Business Services when we go through the property tax presentation. I typically go through 5 to 10 year history of new property. And we do normally have somewhere between 15 and $30 million a year in a district this size of new property. So this development would be on top of that, but new property is a constant every year at some level.
Mr. Adway, as you consider that, 2 additional things. This is talking about operating costs. In Dr. Gordon's opening remarks, he talked a little bit about, and in the letter that the district shared with the city of St. Charles, there was a discussion of classrooms. These are typically paid for outside of operating expense and through capital investment, which is generally a separate levy or some other debt instrument. It would be interesting and valuable to people to understand that distinction. And I'd like to make one other point, and that is when we talk about a new development of this magnitude and the way that the district plans for things, there are existing long-term development plan documents in place both for Kane County and for Elburn and for Campton Hills, as well as St. Charles, that have different sets of values and expectations around the densities of houses within those planning jurisdictions. So when we talk about this particular development and its link to the city of St. Charles's reach into an area that was previously Kane County is different. So as you talk about the rate of new development in this discussion, an exploration of how you handle divergence from the planning master plans that are in place for the different jurisdictions, I think is an important one. Or for us to go back and look at other places and times in the D303 history where large scale developments came to play. And there are many, from Fox Mill to Thornwood to others. And so maybe there's a way for us to think about the history lesson that those developments brought to bear.
I think those are really good points. And I will plan to cover the differences between capital costs and operating costs that are associated with new developments in the presentation at the end of the month. And then, yes, we'll look back to see if there's any history that we can find still record of that may speak to that about previous occurrences, but we can talk about the rates that we're seeing from Pulte as compared to, we'll try to make some comparison to documents that currently exist.
I think along those lines, one thing that we talked about previously was the yields, the student yields as well. So keeping that aspect as well. And I think we talked about potentially using Thornwood as another large scale development. I actually don't think it's the same number of houses. I think we're about 1,000 houses less. But I think that's important for the discussion as well.
And I think this will be included, but the idea that the term age restricted development would have an impact. It could have an impact on the housing market here in St. Charles or around, people moving out and families moving in. There's no prediction I can imagine that you can, but I think we can't ignore that just having a Del Webb is going to mean we won't have new kids. It could be a swell of people moving out there.
Mr. McCabe, on that very point, that was one of the points that I made. So I think some of the very people that will be moving into Del Webb will be some of our people who qualify to move into Del Webb. And they're going to be leaving houses that they raised their families in. Those houses are going to be occupied by other families. So just because we have senior housing does not mean that's not going to increase probably somewhat dramatically the influx of children. So I've been concerned really, well, I'll express my concerns, my other concerns later. So.
Just a suggestion, Mr. Attaway, on your example, I would note somewhere the new construction, the 50 million that you have, that's the first year, right? And so that's where we are receiving the full value benefit.
The numbers that I used on that slide are just sample numbers.
For sure.
Those are not actually tied to anything. But yes, that is
For
correct.
sure.
So that would be in a single year what that would do.
Right. And so I guess I'm just saying just to connect the dots for our community or whoever might be looking at it. This is an illustration of what would happen that first year where you talk about getting the full value of the new construction.
Correct.
And then after that, that 50 million in essence rolls into your EAV.
Correct.
So I would if there's a way to explain that better, I think it's hard for people to understand how you get the full benefit that first year and then what happens.
Agreed.
So.
Thank you.
So my other question was kind of when we probably don't know this, but it's something I'm still wondering about is the order in which this construction is going to take place. Are we going to start with the retirement community? We're going to start with residential, and what impact would that have on taxing versus the burden on the school district? So.
We do actually have that data from Pulte. So that'll be included in the analysis that we present at the end of the month.
And I know some of that has changed a little bit. Have they kind of come up with something that's final? That's been one of my concerns is I think it's changed from what I heard the first time. I think it's changed I think we're on our third iteration.
We do have the most recent data. Yes.
Seeing no other questions, I will move us for discussion item B, committee reports.
At a recent board meeting, it was suggested that the board would like to revisit committee reports. As we heard earlier this evening, the administration or board asked that we reach out to a few districts, see what they were doing, mainly to really look at our aspirational districts, the New Trier, Stevenson, Barringtons, et cetera, as to whether they summarize the committee meetings during their board meetings. Many of them do, but there is a big difference. Their committee meetings are only attended by the co-chairs. 2 board members go to those committee meetings, so they come back, but they still summarize at a very high level of those meetings. The other districts do not summarize. They do the meetings, they submit them. In D303, I think we're fortunate that we live stream them. All of our committees, our board meetings, and they're there for any community member or board member to go back and look and refresh at those. We write up, we have our minutes, and then our communications team does across the boards, which are high-level summaries of those committee reports. Our recommendation is that the committee reports are eliminated, as it appears to be very redundant aspect of a board meeting. However, these are the boards and these are the boards meeting. So it is in the board's hands to have that, what you want administration to do for the agenda.
Before I open that to the floor, I just want to summarize a little bit what you said. What I heard you say is that for those districts that we consider aspirational, who use a committee structure that has a limited portion of the board participate in the direct conversation in the committee meetings, they do summaries. And where districts use committees of the whole, like we do in D303, they tend not to have those summaries at the regular board meetings. Is that about right?
That is exactly
Okay.
right.
Thank you for that. I'll just open the floor to see if there are any other discussion points from board members.
Just as far as some feedback that I've gotten from the community on this subject, I know that the community does appreciate having our meetings live streamed, have things on YouTube, but they don't always pay attention to our other meetings. So while our board of the whole attending all of those committee meetings is certainly beneficial to us in our discussions, the feedback that I've gotten is that it is, some type of summarization on any kind of decision point or any other main discussion that took place in committee. They find it very useful when we do bring it back to the full board meeting, because these are the meetings that, if you look at YouTube, we consistently have the most views on. If you look into our audience, we consistently have the most people attending these meetings. So that's the feedback that I've personally gotten from the community.
On that note, I've received similar feedback, and I'll point out too that very often what's happening is that the committee chair who's presenting is kind of highlighting maybe some of the more salient points in the discussion. Certainly they need to be summarized. And we always try to refer the people to watch those live streams, but the entire public is not elected board members, and they didn't run for the board because they probably don't want to attend all these meetings. They want somebody to tell them what's going on and at least direct them to the salient points, and they elected us for that purpose.
I think to Paul's point, it becomes a bit redundant if we are reading the meeting minutes, and we know that's available for the public in very many ways. I think personally for me, I think it would make sense to, if we are going to keep committee reports, that they become the highlights instead of reading the minutes, because that I think is just taking up a lot more of their time when they could watch the meeting if they wanted the verbatim conversation. They could certainly watch that, but a very high level, if we are going to continue to have committee reports, I think we really need to keep it at a very high level.
No one told me anything about this report. I had no people calling or talking about it at park. So
I asked people because I knew it was a discussion.
I think that what's important is that our community gets the meat of what is going on. And I think we do a really great job with all the way people can find out what's going on. And I think we make it easy for people to fast forward with the streaming if they want to see a particular area. I am with Mrs. Bell. Reading the minutes at this meeting takes too much time. And I feel that if I've sat through, if I sat through that long meeting and had a good discussion of the committee, then it's up to me to be sure I know what's on the agenda and what we're voting on. That's a board member responsibility. If we kept it short and we don't read the minutes, then maybe that will alert the audience. But I think that we do a really great job of before. It used to be we didn't have anything, and that's how the reports came. If we need reports, there are things that go on that we all are involved in that we don't share with each other. DPTO is one. We don't have a report, that happens if.
We used to have a report for.
I used to be on,
Yeah.
I used to report it. So I think that if we feel the need to let other board members know when they're unable to attend, that maybe that's where the reports go. But if we continue, if you feel that the community wants it, then I'm not going to I'm not going to be upset that we're doing it.
Yeah.
I just don't think we have to go through the minutes.
Yeah, for my part, it is just, I think kind of what you're saying is the highlights and just a lot of times the public doesn't know, and sometimes if somebody read today's agenda, they would say, oh, they accidentally put committee reports in two places. Because it says reports, board member reports and committee meetings, and then committee reports. They might not know what's there just by reading an agenda. So for somebody to just kind of, again, not spend 20 minutes on each, not rehash the entire meeting, but these are the items that were discussed. This is what that meant. This is what that agenda item was. And, for example, with business services, we don't have to go through each and every renewal of a software program. Just make mention of that, but I think just to let them know what some of the big items were.
I personally had a good time going through all A to Z items on it. Ms. McCabe, to your point about it, look, when I give my reports on business services, for me, those reports are more targeted to the public than to this body. Most of you are in that meeting, and most of you, when we're having the discussion, I usually look at you and prompt the conversation, right? So I don't have a concern that my fellow board members are keeping up on what we've been doing. That's and again, speaking for myself, anytime I give that, it's truly for the community to know. Because again, we have members of the public body who come and give us feedback about our increasing costs and why are things happening and everything else. And to the point, they've entrusted us with being good stewards of it. And I feel that there's a little bit of that obligation to do it through as many channels, but perhaps as succinctly as possible. I do really appreciate what administration has done over the past year. Scott and the communications team, doing the across the board, doing all of those other avenues. Administration and we as board members, we can see what the level of views on it, right? There's 33, like I forget how many total, there's about 50 some thousand plus voters in our district, right? We can see the views on YouTube of how many people have viewed those committee meetings, how many people have viewed our whole board meetings, and we can see how big the audience is. So again, if there's another avenue for us to be able to continually do this, I'm all for it. But I think it's another channel. Let's utilize it. And if the feedback is let's be more succinct with it, I'm all for that. So I'd also prefer, Justin, can we not have A to Z meeting agenda items for business services?
This has come up many times, so I'm really agnostic. My only ask would be that we don't read the minutes and we try to be succinct and provide truly a summary. I agree. I think it's another great communication channel for our community, but
Well, hearing some consensus emerge from the conversation, it sounds like the perpetuation of the committee meetings and a commitment amongst board members to focus on the most salient points within the committee reports is a good path for us forward, and we can expect to do that in the coming agendas. Thanks for the discussion. I appreciate it. That brings us to item 6, the consent agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda items 6A through 6T?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz and Mr. McNally. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Marsan will take the roll.
Mrs. Peargree,
yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner.
Yes, the motion passes 6-0. That brings us to item 7 for action. 7A is the adoption of the fiscal year 24-25 CUSD 303 budget. Can I have a motion to adopt the fiscal year 24-25 Community Unit School District 303 budget?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz and Mr. McNally. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Marsan, will you please take the roll?
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Peargree,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner.
Yes. Motion passes 6-0. That brings us to 7B, the adoption of fiscal year 24-25 Mid-Valley Special Education Cooperative Budget. Can I have a motion to approve the fiscal year 24-25 Mid-Valley Special Education Cooperative Budget?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. McNally and Mr. Lentz. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Marsan, can you please take the roll?
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Fairgrave,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner.
Yes, the motion passes 6-0. That moves us to item C, the St. Charles Tiffin extension. Can I have a motion to approve a memo indicating no objection to the extension of the St. Charles TIF number 4?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz and Mrs. McCabe. Is there any discussion?
Well, I have a question as far as if for some reason the resolution would not pass, for example, what would be the impact of that? Let's kind of walk through that.
Mr. Attaway is going to join me. The overall impact from our perspective to the city would be roughly $2 million of lost revenue for them. Our understanding is that would need to be made up in their general funds. Our perspective, if we were to lose that from our general fund, there would have to be some reductions in services. I don't know how they operate, but I'm going to ask Mr. Attaway if you have anything else beyond that.
That you summed it up.
Okay.
I'm going to move that we postpone consideration of this till the next board meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
He can make.
He can't.
He can make a motion while there's a motion on the floor,
We're in discussion,
right?
so yes. We're
Yeah,
good.
there-
We're good to, do you want to have further discussion or asking Mr. Lackner why?
Yes.
Maybe
Yes.
let's ask you.
Because it-
So first I'll answer the procedural question. The motion requires a discussion of this motion now, not the original motion. So the original motion about the memo is now on pause as we can discuss the potential for a delay. The reason I made the motion is we've had a discussion already several times about the budget. We've had further discussion about lots of the different cost implications associated with future spending that have dramatic impact on our budget. This particular item impacts our budget in a couple of different ways, one of which is the allowance of a tax abatement. And so my view is until we fully and better understand exactly how this TIF impacts all of our financial impacts, and we did have a good discussion about it in the 29th, was it the 29th, Business Services? It strikes me as prudent to postpone our vote here until the next meeting for further exploration of the impact.
What is the impact of the delay to this, to have an impact?
The city needs to present this TIF to the state legislators in a timely manner. I believe that is at the beginning of November. So we do have some time, but they do have a timeline to send it to state legislators.
Mr. Lackner, just a clarification point here. Are you suggesting then that we would vote next week, or we would discuss next week and vote at the next regular board meeting?
My expectation is the next time the board gathers in session for a vote, we would have this as an agenda item.
Thank you.
So would it resurface then again at the Business Services Committee for further discussion and go back there first and then go?
The motion that I suggested is that we would postpone this vote until the next meeting.
Right.
And if that next meeting happened before Business Services, then no, there would be an opportunity to discuss it at the next Business Services. If our next voting meeting was as scheduled. So if there was a special meeting in between into which we could push this on the agenda, that's how this motion was structured. So if you'd like to amend the motion for a delay to include a remand of this issue to business services, then we would have to amend this motion.
Okay, that would be my recommendation. So I would amend the motion that we delay the voting of the TIF extension until the next regularly scheduled board meeting to allow for further clarification and discussion at business services in September.
And I'm sorry, the clarification on that point. Do you mean the next regularly scheduled regular board meeting like this
Yes.
meeting as
Yeah.
opposed to? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So you have.
So we have an amendment to the motion on the table. Do I hear that rightly, Mrs.
Yes.
Fairgrieve? You've
Yes.
proposed an amendment to include that now the motion is amended such that the delay would take hold until the next regularly scheduled board meeting, which is October 15th. Now, we have the opportunity to accept or reject this amendment.
What new information, from a discussion standpoint? I know that we're going to discuss the St. Charles farm and the implications of that. But what new information will we be looking for out of the Business Services Committee to come back with this? Just impact on the budget for this particular piece of it? I'm just trying to think from a committee standpoint, what would be helpful to other board members if we were to delay it that much further?
Well, from my standpoint, I think it's worth having additional discussion as a board and an opportunity to ask continuing questions. If that's not needed by the collective board, then I'm not clear why we wouldn't vote tonight.
If I understand correctly, that's what you're hoping to accomplish by having this discussion on I think you said the 16th?
That's right.
So you're hoping to accomplish what we would accomplish at a business services meeting.
No, what I moved for was that we would delay until the next time the board came together. We have in conversation the potential for a special board meeting on Monday, the 16th, related to HR issues. This issue could be attached to that agenda. In the interim, I would expect that we would all have the opportunity to look closely at the TIF and the impact that the TIF has on the D303 budget.
Okay.
Is there more you can bring?
The only other information that we may be able to provide. But yes, there is one additional piece of information, but it is a snapshot in time. And that would be looking at the existing TIF increment in the First Street TIF and what effect that would have if that were to roll back onto the tax rolls. So if we had access to that additional assessed value. That would be based on the 2023 levy. So that wouldn't be at the expiration of the TIF. We won't have those numbers until the TIF actually expires. And that we won't be able to project that out over a 12-year period because we don't know what CPI is going to be. So we won't be able to accurately roll that forward for 12 years. But we would be able to provide an exact number based on only the 2023 most recent numbers.
Mr. Hadaway, what is the impact on a TIF for a school district? How does a TIF work for a school in general? I say high level. How do TIF finances impact a school district's finances? Are we losing revenue through a TIF?
The term losing,
not collecting.
So yes,
thank you for that
is
clarification.
correct. So there are a couple different ways that you could view a tax increment financing district. Because essentially what happens is the municipality will freeze taxes or freeze the assessed valuation that is accessible by other taxing bodies for a particular area. Then as they continue to develop that area, any increase in property value is considered a TIF increment. The additional property taxes that are a result from that TIF increment, so between the frozen value and where the actual assessed value is then moved into the TIF to be used for redevelopment. Normally that when I say used for redevelopment, it's used to pay back debt. The city normally needs to issue bonds at the beginning of the TIF when they establish it in order to start redevelopment. So normally that TIF increment that's collected then is used to repay debt over the 23-year period. There is an argument that does exist that if the TIF did not exist, that area would not improve or would not improve as rapidly. So there would technically be no loss to other taxing bodies because there would not be the growth in assessed valuation in that area, but for the TIF. But if you're asking me if school districts lose anything, that would be the only potential loss, is any increase in assessed valuation that may occur during that 23-year period.
But if I can ask a clarifying question, so that money then would be made up by the remainder of the taxpayers, am I correct?
That is correct. So the school districts levy in whole dollars. We don't levy based on the amount of, except for new construction, which we just talked about a minute ago. We don't levy based on the property value that we have within the district. We levy a dollar amount. So if there is a portion that is not contributing, then that will be spread a little bit more. Everyone will take a little bit more of that pie.
So to that point, we are not losing revenue, but we are spreading that burden out among the existing taxpayers. So, and that was the point I wanted clarified, that we're not going to now have a budget that's not balanced. We're just going to have a budget that's balanced by increasing the taxes on other homeowners or businesses in the area.
So can I just ask, sorry. So I'm wanting to understand, and I want you to provide clarification for me. Is that, are we actually increasing by continuing a TIF? Does that mean the surrounding taxpayers are making up for that in addition, or it's just that now I've gotten completely confused?
I need to clarify that the school district is not extending the TIF. That the city would be extending the TIF, and they're asking for the school district to not object to the city extending the TIF. So we are not actually doing anything. To Mr. McNally's point, if the TIF is continued, and this has been happening for 23 years, so this would not be a new thing. This would be a continuation of what has already been occurring. As the district continues to levy property taxes, as we do every year, the increase in valuation, it's not that area in the TIF is not going to be contributing property taxes. It's that the increase in value will not be contributing property taxes to the school district. So because we levy a specific dollar amount, that is going to be made up across the remainder of District 303.
So I would like to thank you for that explanation. I'd like to call the question on the motion as amended to delay the consideration of the TIF until the next regularly scheduled meeting. So what we're voting on here is whether or not to amend the motion, which was to delay until the next regularly scheduled, or the next meeting, pardon me. So shall we accept the motion as amended to delay the consideration of the TIF until the next regularly scheduled meeting? Will we accept that amendment?
I didn't think so either.
Oh, pardon me. Is there a second on Mrs. Fairgrave's motion to amend the motion to delay consideration of the TIF, not until the next board meeting, but until the next regularly scheduled meeting?
I'll second that.
Thank you for that motion, Mrs. Fairgrave, and for the second, Mrs. Bell. Then we'll take a vote on.
I'm sorry, can I ask
motion.
one more
Please.
clarifying question
Yes.
on that then? Would this, would a delay of that to that point make this kind of put the city up against it time-wise? In other words,
Yeah, I
our acting sooner, it would seem, would be
Sooner
better
it
for them.
would always be better for the city.
Yeah.
If they have this in a timely fashion, they can still.
I don't want there to be a domino effect of them having to
Correct.
call several emergency meetings in order to address what we've had to say.
In the discussion, please, Mrs. McCabe, go ahead.
I also wonder if the delay will be seen in a certain way. And because if they have to go to the legislature and we have not voted on it, that must have an impact.
They will not be able to bring this forward if this district does not vote on this.
Right.
They
And
can't bring it forward. They
They
have to
cannot.
have us. Okay.
so I understand the challenge that Mr. McNally brings up. And part of the reason that I suggested the motion in the way that I did was because I do believe that delay past the coming special meeting on Monday could or might put the city in some peril in preparation.
Did you say they meet in November? I'm sorry, they need to present this in November. Is that what you said?
Yes, yes.
So if we give them
But they have work to do too. So they have to wait for taxing bodies to vote on these things, and then it needs to go to their city for their processes as well. So sooner is better for the city, but the board needs to make their own decision.
The city is also acquiesced to this board's request to end this early. So we did make an ask of the city. The city was, did give us positive feedback to our ask. So I just want to remind the board of that.
Yeah, I think in the course of this discussion, I do think it's important to call out that good intergovernmental relationships are important and critically important when we have overlapping constituencies and mutual dependence on the taxpayer for all of the different budgets. So I certainly appreciate that point, Mr. Lenz. It's a really fair and important point to make.
I want to give them the opportunity to get their ducks in a row as best they can. So for my part, I'll just say I am in favor of doing this sooner than later.
I'm comfortable withdrawing my motion. I believe I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm comfortable doing that. I guess I would go back to, I'm still a little perplexed as to why we're not voting tonight then, which I guess we can certainly deliver through
Well, we've had a robust discussion and we certainly can have an opportunity to continue that discussion and to continue finding answers for any of the questions that folks here at the board table posed to Mr. Attaway. And so to me, the delay until the special meeting on Monday sounds prudent.
The reason I can see delaying is that we are in this really awkward time right now with this proposed project that could have a huge impact on us. The TIF comes, we're looking at the levy. We're trying to figure out how we just put a pause. It's like all of a sudden everything's on the table. So I can see, but I don't know that we have time in a special meeting or whenever we meet to put all that together to make, because it comes down to, do we let the city do a TIF? Do we have part of it? When this is a much bigger issue, the whole thing is a big issue. And I'm just kind of rambling here, but I hope we're not wasting people's time by delaying it. That's where I would land. And I would also go with what Mr. McNally said. I'd rather do it earlier than later.
So yeah, to my point, what I'm trying to say, I would rather do this, give them the time. We have had so many things thrown at us within the last couple of weeks, especially that impact our budget, our money, and I don't know that I've personally had enough time to process all of it myself. And there might be questions. Certainly one of them came up tonight that I hadn't thought of. So I like to be able to process that. But again, I don't want to delay the city and then put them in a situation where they're trying to make a decision at the last minute.
So procedurally, where that leaves us with the amendment withdrawn, that leaves us with a motion on the table to delay this item for a vote at the next board meeting. And so what I'd like to do at this point is take a roll call vote on that motion.
So to clarify, the motion would be to delay this vote
On
Until
item
next-
7C
Until
specifically.
the 16th.
Until the 16th.
Okay.
So
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Fairgrave,
No.
Mr. Lentz,
No.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner.
yes. So the motion passes 1, 2, 3, 4 to 2. That moves us to item 7D, the Transitional English Partnership Agreement with Elgin Community College. Can I have a motion to approve the Transitional English Partnership Agreement with Elgin Community College?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. McNally and Mrs. McCabe. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mrs. Marsan, can you please take the roll?
Yes, Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Fairgrave,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner.
Yes. The motion passes 6-0. That brings us to item E, the Horizon Education quote related to the ACT test. Can I have a motion to approve the Horizon Education contract for ACT testing?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. McCabe and Mr. Lentz. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Marsan, will you please take the roll?
Mrs. Fairgrave,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner.
Yes, the motion passes 6-0. That brings us to item F, board member registration for the Kishwaukee Conference of the IASB. Can I have a motion to approve school board members' registration for the Kishwaukee Division meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Bell and Mrs. McCabe. Is there any discussion? I'm just going to offer one comment here on this one. There is an opportunity to meet with different legislators from who will be present at this Kishwaukee Conference of meeting of the IASB. And so it is an opportunity for board members to participate. And there's an opportunity through this, the adoption of this, for any of the board members to register for that conference. Seeing no other discussion, Ms. Marsan, can you please take the roll?
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Fairgrave,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner.
Yes. The motion passes 6-0. That brings us to item 8 for information. There are three items included in the packet for information only. They are the Freedom of Information Act requests, the district enrollment, and the 24-25 administrator teacher salary and benefit report. That brings us to item 9, new business, at which time I'll open the floor for board members to introduce new business items. Do any board members have any new business that they would like to introduce tonight?
We've gotten quite a bit of communication. It came up even tonight as well, again, related to the dual language strategic direction that we're going, and the construction related to Richmond and how that was to be built out and ultimately fit into our boundary discussion. So I think that whole entire discussion is worth having again, especially when I don't know that we know how long it's going to take for Charles Farm to actually produce.
Yeah, I think I'd like to add to that point. I think it's a shrewd observation. We voted on the construction approvals at the board table. We've had to take a pause. We don't know how long that pause for prudence requires, given the planning horizon that we've heard about for Charles Farm. I think we'll learn more in the coming weeks. One recommendation I would make would be to add to both business services and L&T discussions of both issues. One, the construction planning, because it has impact on programs, and two, the dual language program calendar. And I'd personally like to see each of those in each committee, both the construction implications on program within L&T and vice versa within business services. And I think the idea of getting toward an estimate or some feeling of how long and when we'll feel the pinch associated with any additional student counts or costs from Charles Farm, when we would have to know in order to minimize the delay associated with the plans at Richmond, and when we would have to know enough to feel comfortable moving forward with those plans, I think would be part of the things I'd like to see on the agenda. Let me offer the floor.
Yeah, I was gonna even add on to that further, that our obligations with the language as it is, right? You know, are we at risk? Are there other things related to that? So just, again, it is something that the community has given us a lot of feedback about as well. We know our fiscal situation, we know other pieces. So I think it's a really good discussion.
So I'm being a co-chair of L&T. How could we structure it so we don't have two separate meetings talking about, if you want the program part to be included both in business services as well as construction in L&T, is there a possibility of a joint meeting that where this becomes the focus instead of us having, I am thinking of Dr. Igo and almost Dr. Attaway to have to work how we could work that out. But is there a possibility of us doing a joint one with this being the topic?
Or splitting it up from a staffing or other things. I know that there's a number of things on the business services side that we've already previously talked about, and I think we're in some of the budget discussions earlier. So
I think from my point of view, I would add that the idea of thinking about go, no-go dates associated with construction and how those impact school years is critically important. And then thinking also about the alternative plan for student achievement if the dual language single site is no longer feasible, I think are important pieces for us to break apart. My feeling would be, if that's one meeting, fine.
It would,
Oh,
sorry.
No, you go.
I think it would be really important for L&T discussions around the tie into construction timing so that we are making sure that programming is lined up with what we can or can't do as far as construction changes. So for me, I kind of, maybe that was your intention or not your intention. That's kind of how I read that comment, was how the construction timing coincides with how we're supporting those kiddos programmatically. I think you mentioned it as well. I think I'm totally fine with it being one meeting, however it works best. But I think that would be the tie over for your committee, specifically with regards to construction.
With this conversation around dual language, you have to have the program conversation and the construction conversation. They do not go in silos, because at the end of the day, dual language 1-way or 2-way needs 12 classrooms. With that, we would need additional construction. So we will package them together. We'll talk with the different co-chairs of the different committees, and we will work this out so we don't have to work it out here at the table.
Yeah, just my one other, I do think personally, I think there's probably a lot of merit to having, it would be an additional committee meeting with business services and learning and teaching. I think this is a meaty enough topic with many things feeding in.
You're absolutely right. Because one of the meatiest aspects of this is the programmatic side of things. We can have a good conversation at one of the committee meetings with construction and timelines and those aspects. But I also want to be respectful to Dr. Igo and the team, making sure that they have enough time to really understand what could be those potential next steps for us. So we're allowing the one conversation to occur, and then we come back to which I would think would be an L&T meeting with more substantial information around the program side of things, to your point, because I do think it will be a very in-depth conversation on both of them. But we also need to give more time for the learning teaching team to grapple with this concept.
So could you, I'm not sure that that's what Mrs. Fairgrieve was asking, but could you go back to cabinet, work it out, figuring out how to, for us to best get the information as we all attend, but if it could be done in one meeting instead of two, I think with one.
If it's in one, it will be later. It will be later. It will be because we need to respect the
understand.
time of figuring out the program aspect of it. So if you're comfortable with hearing some early and then some later, but if you want it all together, it will be a later conversation.
Well, what kind of time frame are you?
So I would think, because we're committed to working with our staff and others. So I would think, and I'm also looking at some of the upcoming schedule that we did at the previous learning teaching meeting where we have a very full agenda, just trying to look at that. But I would think no earlier than November. It may need to be just a special meeting. So
Well,
it has
that's
its
why I
own.
said, I think it needs to be a special meeting personally.
If we do one full where we have everything a part of it, a late November, I think we can pull all of that together for the board, or early December where we can have everything for you, from programmatic to construction to all of those pieces. And I would agree with you. I think it would probably make more sense for the board and the community that we're not tagging them along down the road, but we could just do a special meeting on that topic.
And by programmatic, we'll have multiple avenues.
Yeah,
strategic
you'll talk
avenues,
about
right?
where
Because
we're-
personally, I'm not 100% convinced that there isn't a way to still do a one-sided dual language, for example. So I would still want to see that in comparison to what other.
So that's the work they need to work through too.
Okay.
That's what Dr. Igo said as well. She was
Okay.
like, okay, we've got to figure this work out together collectively
Yeah.
with teachers, administrators and others to determine what that next pathway is. So you're right. So I think in December, if the board's okay with that, a special meeting in December on just that topic.
Would we be amenable to the timeline discussion for go, no go dates separate from some of that? Because my concern with waiting until December, right? We did put some stuff out there, right? If we want to pivot potentially again or anything else along those lines. Now we wait until December, we potentially miss some things that we would need in order to adjust schedule. So that's my concern, is potentially meeting earlier on some of at least the timeline aspect of it.
So can I
Yeah, yeah.
add on that? Because one of the things that we know is that the construction process takes an awfully long time. And the activity that was pre-construction planning that was already underway for the movement of materials and the planning of that facility over at Richmond is where we've paused spending in order to hold and reserve these dollars. I think the critical point that Mr. Lentz is getting to is how long of a delay, if tomorrow we were to be able to say, hey, we have certainty and that plan that we previously adopted still makes sense, how long would we be delayed? Or is there a date at some point where we say, hey, we will miss an entire school year if we don't restart planning today?
That I would like to avoid.
Me too.
I'd also like to, I think it's important that we let the public know what we are doing in the interim, because right now we are not doing what we thought we were going to do. And they need to know that those kids are receiving an adequate education.
We're doing that right now.
Yeah.
Our community knows exactly what they're getting right now for this year's students in our dual one-way language program and our traditional bilingual program. So that work continues to today.
That hasn't changed, correct?
That has not
Right,
changed.
okay.
Yes. Yeah, we can talk timeline. That can be at a business services meeting from a high level conversation where we can talk about where we're at, where we're not. Now, I will say, we are very close, if not already past the timeline for next year. Because when I brought that to the board, that was part of this, that things are moving quickly, and consistently, we only have one set of, we only have this $11 million. And once that is spent, there is no other dollars currently. But I'll refine that and we'll get that back to you at the business services September 30th meeting.
If we're all done on this one, I think I did have one other potential item, we did hear some transportation things. I've also heard some good transportation things. So if we could get a report back on, what's transportation, like, okay, what are the new routes? I know that there were a number of requests that we had to potentially designate dangerous routes, just kind of status update on what that process. I know it's a little bit of longer process as well, but just an agenda item about transportation so that we, again, keep visibility to that.
Any other items for new business?
I'm not sure if this is the right place for this or not. You can let me know, but I was thinking we could possibly, we had talked about this in the past, reviewing some of contracts that we have that are longstanding, specifically legal. Just if we could just look at that again. I don't know if that goes to business services. I don't know where that fits, but something that I think that we just want to make sure we're always reviewing where we're at with.
If I heard you rightly, it's a review, adding to the agenda and to the work both at committee and at the board table, a review around long-term service contracts, particularly legal and others.
Correct. Thank you.
And so to clarify, that would go to committee, right?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
And for those contracts would be business services.
That's what I was saying. I'm thinking it's probably not perfectly correct here, but thank you.
Any other new business? Hearing none, that brings us to item 10, end of meeting citizen comments. Mr. Lentz, I hope that you have that preamble still. We do have citizen comments.
I do, Mr. Lackner. During the public comment period, members of the public body who wish to speak are asked to first state their name and the community in which they reside. Each individual will have up to 3 minutes to address the board on a topic of their choosing. We ask all individuals who address the board to do so with respect and civility towards others. Please note that personnel matters are sensitive and confidential. We also want to inform our speakers that all regular, special, and committee meetings are live streamed and available for viewing at any time on the district's YouTube channel. Personal information should be considered before making a statement that will be recorded and made public. While the board will not respond to today's public comment during this meeting, we are committed to listening to you to help support our work for the district on behalf of our students, staff, families, and community members. Thank you.
Our end of meeting citizen comments. First speaker is Matthew Reed.
Dr. Gordon, members of the board, thank you very much for listening to me tonight. My name is Matthew Reed. I'm a 29-year resident of St. Charles. Both my children came up through Lincoln School, then through Redling, St. Charles East, and both graduated from UIUC, which I mentioned is a testament to the caliber of education that they received, thanks in no small measure to the board. I'd like to speak today about the proposed development at Charles Farm. I think that it's incumbent on all of us to remember that what's happening out with this proposal is the way in which that land is going to come into District 303, which is through annexation. And that gives essentially St. Charles the unilateral right to say what happens with that land, how it's developed, et cetera. We talk about bringing new students into District 303, but I haven't heard anyone mention that approximately 2/3 of the new students there will actually be going to Geneva schools, District 304. And I think that that needs to be taken into account. When this land comes in via annexation, 304 and all the surrounding municipalities have absolutely no say in what happens. So Dr. Gordon, I applaud your letter. I like what I heard, but I would suggest to you and to the members of the board that you really consider that annexation is not the way to bring this property in. Rather, it should be done, as Jerry Johnson mentioned, under the auspices and jurisdiction of Kane County, as was done in 2007, and the collaboration and participation of all the municipalities and school districts involved. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. That brings us to item 11, adjournment. Can I have a motion to adjourn the September 9th, 2024 school board meeting?
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Mr. McNally and Mr. Lenz. Ms. Marsan will take the roll.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Fairgrave,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner.
Yes, the meeting is adjourned at 7:40.